Thanks for watching WISD TV. My name is Mary Center, and we are on the campus of University High School. Today we're joined by author Tony Castro, a former Waco ISD student and University Trojan, and Jeremiah Saldano, and he's a sophomore here at this school. Today we're going to talk to Tony Castro. He's in town from California to promote his newest book, The Prince of South Waco. Tony grew up real close to this school and in the neighborhoods here in South Waco. And why don't you start by just saying what brought you here to Waco to promote your book?
Wanted to launch the book here because so much of it had happened here. Of course, Waco's in the title, and the Waco Public Library was such a close, it was like a second home to me growing up in Waco. I spent weekends there. I spent Saturday and Sunday afternoons for sure, but then also spent the evenings there and a lot of the afternoons, and on summer vacations used it a great deal as well.
Well, we want to welcome you back to University High School. This is not the high school that you probably remember, but I know the students here today, you spoke to two groups of students, and I know that they enjoyed hearing your remarks and of recalling your childhood of growing up in South Waco. And why don't you talk a little bit about your early days and what it was like to grow up here during that time period?
Okay, well, it's not the high school that I grew up in or went to, but it's the high school of my dreams. It's a fabulous facility. I wished I had gone here. I grew up, like you said, not far from here. My father worked at the VA hospital. I grew up on Lexington Avenue there in what we called Beverly Hills, and went to Waco Public Schools for 11 years. Went to Baylor. I grew up really a lifelong Baylor Bear from the time I can remember. My grandmother had a restaurant on 14th and Dutton, which is right across from Muni Stadium, and back until 1950, that's where Baylor played its football games, and I would go to a lot of those games. And then we lived in 4th and Spate, which is now faculty housing, and then after the tornado moved further into South Waco. The whole idea of the Prince of South Waco is sort of like a tongue-in-cheek thing, because I was hardly a prince, but it was one of those maybe you want to be princes, so maybe you want to, something in your dreams, and it was about the highs and lows of growing up in Waco in a very difficult, very different time.
You talked about growing up real near the Baylor Stadium at that time, which was the old Muni Field.
Right.
And I'm wondering, I know several of your books that you've published are about baseball and athletics in general. I'm wondering if your love of sports began by being so close to the Baylor athletics or to athletics in general, and if that inspired you to become a writer.
To some degree. A lot of it came from my father. He was a big New York Yankee fan. When he came back from World War II, he spent some time in New York and saw Joe DiMaggio play, and everything became, he was enamored with the Yankees and with pinstripes, suits. He wore pinstriped suits. My grandfather wore pinstriped suits. The pinstripes became a magical type of a thing, and I guess it just became infectious. I wrote a book about Mickey Mantle, the switch hitter for the Yankees in the 50s and 60s. And that was also inspired by that. Mickey was my hero in the 1950s, and I played golf with him in the early 70s after he had retired, and I was a young journalist in Dallas. And so part of the book about this Prince of South Waco, while it is about growing up, it goes into 1978, my final years here in Texas, and I had met Mantle in Dallas. He was retired. He was unhappy in retirement. He was this lonely hero in a football, living in Dallas. Dallas was not a baseball city, still isn't. It was a football town.
You also told the students today about your passion about wanting to be a journalist and loving to write. Yet your father had hoped that you would become perhaps maybe a doctor or a lawyer or something more professional that he had thought. I'm wondering about this passion that you had, and how did you happen to have that passion for one particular thing?
I'm not sure. I mean, some of it was rebellion, I think, and some of it was, being an outlaw to some degree. Some of it was maybe not wanting what my parents wanted. My father was in a very patriarchal system that existed at that time, not just among Latino families, but among, I think, all families. He was had been a military man, very much considered himself as such, and he wanted his son to be an officer, Texas A&M. The Corps at Texas A&M was drilled into me, and that's probably one of the reasons I didn't want to go there. As far as the writing, a lot of it had to do with, I think, as much of the American dream that my parents had. They forgot to teach their kid to speak English, and so I grew up a sickly kid, not having a lot of friends, but being very friendly and very, shy, going into kindergarten in the first grade, and nothing ever happened. In the second grade, they were about to put me in special ed because they thought I was mentally retarded. It turned out that I didn't speak English, and they quickly solved that, and that became a passion. It was a student teacher who caught on that, hey, this kid doesn't speak English. That's the problem here. He understands some of the things, and he understands Hank Williams songs, but he's not stupid enough to sing them to his teacher in class. And so that just set this whole thing off. I was helped along the way by the Waco, I think it was called the Baylor Literacy Program over on the campus, and very quickly learned the language, and it became just an obsession after that. It's kind of like being denied something and suddenly you discover it and you want it. I became addicted to the language, and incurably so.
It sounds like you had a lot of challenges too. I know you told the students earlier that you were one of two Latinos in your class or in your school. I don't remember.
Well, in my class, and maybe one of three in the entire school. This was Gurley Elementary, which was on South 3rd Street. It was named after a Confederate officer, and it was a school deep in the heart of South Waco. And so, yeah, I was as vaguely Hispanic as I might have grown up. My friend who was the classmate that I had, who also happened to be Hispanic, was even more vaguely Hispanic. He didn't speak Spanish. And so I guess we had that in common. And so, yeah, it was one of those things where Waco was different. It was 6% Hispanic at that time in the 50s and into the 60s. And, the immigration situation, which has helped change the country, didn't really exist at that time. So the challenges that I had were that. I mean, there were other things. Sure, there was inherent racism and discrimination that a lot of people have had problems with. I kind of just figured that was a given, like in a geometry problem, when you're trying to figure it out, certain things are given. Well, you're going to have these kinds of givens. I mean, I also wasn't 6'4" and lefty, and I couldn't pitch for the Yankees. I mean, that was probably more of a heartbreak than anything else. So in this instance, it was just dealing with that, and like what I said to the students, when you've got these barriers, whatever it may happen to be, rather than feeling sorry and for yourself, just deal with it and go around it, whatever it happens to be, whether it's an abusive environment at home, abusive situation with, kids, or lack of money, or whatever it is. I mean, there's always solutions. It may seem Pollyannish especially when you're in it and when you look upon the tragedies that have happened to some kids who have faced problems, but you have to hold on to that dream.
I'm wondering, those challenges and adversities that pushed you to want to succeed, if you look at today's students, they don't really face as many challenges as you had. It's more equal now. What kind of student would you be in today's society, do you think?
I'm not sure, but I mean, they do have challenges. They're just different challenges. Right. The economy today has really made it a challenge for universities, and in terms of offering the kinds of aid that they were offering maybe 10 or 15 years ago. It's also, the economy is one of those things that's going to hang around with us forever. That I think in the kind of economy that we have today, where there aren't going to be these jobs, and so you could have a lot of these kids that I was talking to today go out and get degrees in four-year schools, get second degrees, and there not be jobs. So those are in some ways even more frightening than I think the challenges and hurdles that I faced.
Right. Well, there's nothing like having a passion and a challenge to drive somebody. What advice do you have for a young student who wants to follow in your footsteps and become a writer or somebody that's in the journalism profession?
find another profession because this one doesn't pay very well and you have to really work long hours. I would say that if you're going to do that, you have to really buckle down and do old style things. You have to read the masters on it. You have to go back to Mark Twain, who's the founder of American literature, if you want to be honest about it. And you have to read people like that and people who unfortunately are probably not even introduced to today's students. I mean, people like Norman Mailer in the 70s, people like who's still with us today, Tom Wolfe, the writer, Thomas Wolfe, Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald. I think that if you did away with everything else in English programs, English literature programs, and just dealt with those, starting with Twain and a few others, you would get some of this interest because some of the people that we have in there. I mean, do I really want to read Sherwood Anderson's short stories? No. I want to read F. Scott Fitzgerald. I want to read about the craziness of the 20s. I was that way then, and a lot of the kids that I talked to, and they went to see this horrible movie of The Great Gatsby, but if they were to see and be exposed to the book in high school, and it's not that hard of a read.
Well, a wise student might also want to spend time talking with Tony Castro, and that's why we caught up here with Jeremiah Saldano, the sophomore here at this school. And what did you take from this speaking engagement today?
I enjoyed hearing his story. It was an interesting story because I'm kind of my family situation is kind of the same way. We're not the most well-off people, but we make do with what we can, and so it was nice to hear it from somebody else's view, and especially an author who came from South Waco. So it was nice.
Well, it sounds like you also have a passion because I saw that you were talking to him after his speech and that you were asking him questions. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what your passion is?
Well, if anything, I would love to be a film director and an actor, but my hobby since I was little has been to write, and currently I'm actually working on a book that I'd like to get published eventually, but it was nice to get some tips and to hear some of his stories to help me further along the path.
That's great. And could you share maybe one of the tips that you got from today?
Just keep reading it over, write anything down that you might think of, talk to other authors in the same field of books that you're writing. Those kinds of things. That's
great. And I know you're just a sophomore, but do you have an idea of where you want to go to college?
Oh, yes. I have 3 schools actually, Ithaca, La Monnier, or the Vancouver Film School.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you, Jeremiah. Appreciate you talking to us. I don't know if you have any connections at any of those schools, but he's a kid that needs to go there.
No, I've been to Ithaca. It's a beautiful campus.
Great, great. Well, we want to mention that you mentioned that you were in Waco ISD schools for 11 years. You stopped short before that senior year. We're not going to tell you why because we're going to make them buy the book, right?
Okay.
But we want to also say that you are hopefully an alumni by choice of University High School.
I am. I mean, there's a sign here. It says, once a Trojan, always a Trojan. And I guess that certainly speaks to me because, I loved my year over at Riker. That's where I graduated from. That's where I spent my senior year. But most of my childhood friends were either at Waco High or at university. And I was spending a great deal of time at university that senior year simply because so much of my social life was still there. What social life I had,
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time, coming all the way from California just to speak to these university students while you're on your book signing tour. We appreciate that, Mr. Castro. And Jeremiah Saldano, thank you for talking to us today. Thank you for watching WISD TV. My name is Mary Center from University High School, where there are learners today and leaders tomorrow.